Hello, welcome to Diagonal Move. My name's Neil, and this is turn number 6 in Across the Bug River, a series of videos in which I provide after-action reports and turn overviews of my campaign game of the Bug River. Up to now, if you've been following along so far, you'll know that this has been very much a German advance and Soviet retreat type game. There have been a number of significant challenges to the Soviets, shall we say, whether that's lower effectiveness rating divisions overall, challenges involving the German use of the reroll counters and initiative transfer at times when the Soviet player probably really wished they hadn't done it. Units that have proved less effective than you would hope, and a situation here where some of the reinforcements for the Soviets have found themselves assigned to a different division. So in this case they were assigned to the 135th Infantry. However, that 135th Infantry HQ is now over here, miles away from where the anti-tanks are, as a result of being forced to displace by the Germans, and now the anti-tanks are disrupted and unable to automatically refit, which is what normally happens to most combat units that are disrupted at the end of a turn. Worst case scenario could be what's just happened down here, where your disrupted unit undergoes a number of supply attrition checks and is eventually removed from the map if they cannot get themselves out of that tight little spot they've got themselves in terms of command ranges and so on. Supply attrition just here, and that unit I just showed you was a victim of supply attrition as well. So the Soviets are clinging on by the skin of their teeth very much, and units that came on as reinforcements that I had high hopes for in terms of how they might be able to turn the game around for the Soviet player have not really materialised. Whether that's due to terrible planning and on my part as the player, or whether that's due to the historical mismatch of the forces and so on, I really don't know at this point. But either way, this is a German-dominated game at the moment. And I wonder, and I've been thinking about this for a while, how can the Soviet player prevent this from being a one-sided onslaught? And, you know, if you were playing multiplayer, would it be a game that you could win as the Soviets? And I just wonder if you can. And the way I'm going to have a look at this is, you can have a look at this in terms of the victory points. Now, I don't know if you can see that down there, but you need, it's a sliding scale of German victory, basically. So I don't think there's any way the Soviet player can ever really win in the sense of turning back the German advance and then attacking and gaining ground from the Germans. It's more a case of delaying the Germans, preventing them from doing certain conditional victories. For example, there was the Puritsk hex just here, Lokachi there, and Volodymyr-volinskii were all victory points if that hex was conquered by the Germans before a certain point, which they did here and they did here, but not in Volodymyr-volinskii. So there's elements there of delaying tactics that have proved quite successful. There's also potential to disrupt command paths in key places. So with controlling a hex or conquering a victory point hex, however you wish to term it, you have to, as the German player, trace a line of command all the way back from the hex to the supply area. So from here, so for example, this hex here has to have a clear line of supply to the German supply area. And that's fine if you've got nothing in the way, but as soon as you have a Soviet zone of control, or you break that command path and you're forced to go around as the German player in order to maintain that supply route, but you can only have a maximum of 5 hexes that are not on either road or rail. So I'm wondering whether we can position some of these units near the victory point hexes so as to disrupt those command lines and deny the victory points of the Germans, with the intention of keeping the German victory points to a minimum. So if the Germans have 15 victory points or less, it's a decisive victory for the Soviets. So I guess it's a case of careful defeat, if you like, or victory from the jaws of defeat. And purely through those delaying tactics, the units of the, I called them the 6th last time, but they're not, I think they're 111th. These units here and these units here, which are the 299th, if they get off the eastern edge of the map, they're a victory point for every certain number of strength points that gets off the map. So just preventing those divisions from escaping the map will also benefit the Soviet player. Minimising losses, because another way of Germans get victory points is through inflicting significant losses. So whenever you come into contact for a battle, another possibility is to just withdraw. So, you know, if the coming into a fight here, so long as you're not a victory point hex, you could withdraw. That's a terrible example perhaps. Let's say coming into a fight here, just withdraw. Germans have to then do something to advance further on. So it's a interesting position for the Germans, an interesting puzzle from the Soviet point of view, how you can prevent the Germans from winning. And I guess it's a way of thinking of this type of game where you're not looking to win the battle, you're just looking to lose it less conclusively than it was lost historically, if that makes sense. Anyway, hopefully that's made some sense, and hopefully that's giving you an idea of how I'm going to try and play the Soviet player. It's a thing I've been struggling with basically since about turn 2 as to what the Soviets can do in the face of the Panzer Blitzkrieg and the Blitzkrieg of the German forces. I think that's what I'm going to try in the next couple of turns. This is the penultimate turn, as I said, so it's the final turn. After this turn there are no more reinforcements for anybody. The only reinforcements this game were these few here, which were part of the 19th Tank Division. We shall see what they can do. Yeah, let's see if that works then. Let's see if we can deny German victory rather than win for it as a Soviet, if that makes sense. Midway through turn 6, and we've reached kind of a turning point for this particular turn. The Soviets are more or less spent in terms of activations. You may be able to see it just at the very top of the screen there. There's 6 of their 7 formations are now either on 0 formation activations or 1 activation formation left for this entire turn, with probably relatively limited opportunity to get formation activations in turn 7 because of the potential for interdiction to go up to 2. Only the 1st anti-tank division have any real formations remaining. However, they're tied down defending against the panzers. So, for example, the anti-tanks are here and their units are dotted around. Some of them have been destroyed by the advance of the panzers. Most others, including the 19th tanks, who are just sort of here and a couple sort of there, have all started to slowly pull back, trying that tactic I was talking about earlier of slowly but surely moving back to make the Germans move forward and expend their formation activations by advancing very slowly and through rubbish terrain. And this kind of network of rivers here really helps that for the Russian perspective. Unfortunately, that combination of the Schlachtenglück counter and the initiative passing, or the initiative transference, has meant that the Germans have forced the Soviets to spend more activations than they would have liked to by this point, meaning from the German perspective the 2 panzer units still have a sizable number of formation activations remaining, 6 and 5 respectively for the 14th and 13th panzers, who are here, and the 14th at the top there, and they're now going to just be a very blunt instrument and hammer their way through to get along that road, and then also along the train track and the road towards the north. Yeah, so turn is going to wind up fairly soon, and I'll jump back in once those panzers have had their chance to wreak havoc along the main communication lines. But before I do, I just wanted to highlight a couple of interesting VP conditions that I completely forgot to mention at the start of this particular video, and that is that the Germans, in the same way that the Soviets can lose or can give away victory points for not expending these counters, the Germans have some VP loss conditions that I didn't mention at the start of the turn. I just completely forgot. They are that for each third unit destroyed, out of command or isolated, they'll lose 1 VP. So that means that this unit and this unit plus 1 more will be a loss of a VP at the end of the game for the Germans. So they've got to try and maintain those lines of command, those lines of communication. Additionally, for each of their formation activation markers that are below 2 activations at the end of the game, they also lose a VP. So that means the Germans cannot have a massive all-out expenditure of effort in the last turn. They've got to save something back, presumably for, you know, later in the campaign that isn't played through in this particular game. But you cannot have an all-out expenditure as the German player without paying the cost in victory points, which is really interesting, particularly when you consider that that means that most of the formations, for example the 111th here, who are these purple ones down the bottom, these guys will have a maximum of not sure if that's going to focus at all, but yeah, there's a six there. That's the maximum number of formation activations they can have. They're currently on 0. They'll get 4 at the start of next turn, so that means they can expend 2 formation activations, or they contribute to a VP loss. So there's an interesting question now of how much do I expend the rest of the units in the hope of having a big turn next turn, and how much do I push forward this turn and have a more moderate turn next turn, or do I just risk it and risk those victory point losses? Interesting decision to make there. In terms of those counter-attack orders, I think I waved them up on the screen a minute ago. They are now fully expended, so these counters will not count towards German victory anymore. I've used those in the defence of this region here, fairly unsuccessfully to be honest, and also in the defence of this region up here, a little bit more successfully. So let me carry on with the Panzer advance, and I'll join back at the end of the turn to see how we're doing and some thoughts for turn 7. Turn 6 is over. As expected, the Soviets ran out of formation activations way before the German side did, allowing the Germans to then use activation after activation after activation to just hammer as much as they possibly could on the defending Soviet forces in this region here, and then also towards the north there, to try and break through towards these relatively valuable victory point hexes here at Zatursky, and then just slightly off map at Toshin. And the north, Turopin is the most valuable hex. And really it was a case of, do I, as a German player, save something back for next turn, bearing in mind those conditions I mentioned earlier about having victory point losses with lines of command and formation activations under a certain level, or do I just go for it right now, get as far as possible? And I decided on the latter. It just seemed to make sense to try and push through. By doing that, I noticed something really interesting, and that is how limited the panzer forces are when they're acting mostly on their own. Without the infantry support, they really struggle the panzers, that is, to really do much if the roads are blocked. So, for example, I'll just zoom in a little bit just so you can see this. When we look at the terrain, and I'll just show you on the player aid card as well, actually, the costs for motorised units across marshy terrain, forested regions are very, very high. There's also limits on how far they can move when you come across streams and so on and so forth, plus zone of control challenges as well in those more built-up areas for the AFVs. So they are the units with tank points with those yellow squares you can probably hopefully just about see there, and that means that if you have a group of panzers, which was the case here, and the enemy is in the wooded terrain, it's very difficult to get that armour support that you would normally have had the combat been out in the open. Equally, when you try and move towards an enemy that is in the wooded terrain or marshy terrain, if there's no road, it costs so much in terms of movement points that you're going to spend a good few activations trying to get across. And then when you get there, it's very simple for, as what happened here, a unit to just move backwards one space, and you have to do the whole thing all over again. And without infantry in close support, without keeping them together, it suddenly becomes very difficult to get anywhere with the panzers, despite the superiority, despite how effective they are in combat. In the entire turn, these panzers have basically moved from here to here, and several of them were all disrupted. Meanwhile, the Soviets, they've lost a few, don't really have anybody disrupted, but they just moved back one at a time, one at a time, one at a time, and forced the Germans to really kind of stagger their advance somewhat. It's blunted the effectiveness of those panzers quite nicely, really, and maybe that plan I was discussing earlier on in this video wasn't actually as crazy as it sounded. So how would you get around that? Well, it's got to be the infantry. You've got to try and keep, as I've done here, the infantry in close proximity with the panzers, so that you can try and circumvent this terrain advantage that the Soviets have against the motorised units and the AFVs. Let's just head up to the north of the map now to see how that might work coming into the next turn. Here we are at the north of the map, and hopefully it's not too out of focus or wobbly. I've had to go onto shaky cam because of the limitations of the equipment I have. But this is the very, very northern edge of the map. The victory point hex I'm trying to get to is just here, the town of Turopin. We have the 14th Panzer really pushing up hard through this road, but we are limited by woods and thicker wooded terrain here, and then marsh and rivers, meaning the only effective routes through for the motorised units are this railway line and then this road, both of which now have enemy units or enemy divisions blocking them. We also have a river. Now the river is a real roadblock for the motorised units, unless you're on an actual road or a rail and you can cross using a bridge of some kind, because you have to use all of your movement points to get across the river. Equally, the marshy terrain, if you're a motorised unit and you're not on the road, you have to take an effectiveness check and potentially risk disruption in order to go through the marshy terrain without any road or rail network there. And that's made it quite easy for the Germans to the Soviets just to block those roads, put the improved defence counters on there, and just sit and wait basically as these German panzers just move up one space at a time. So from the German point of view, what I've had to do and what I'm going to try and do is use these infantry here and the infantry just here to pincer around and try and get that hex. But then that raises further questions, because in order for that to count as a victory point hex, there needs to be a clear line of communication not greater than 5 hexes off road or rail in order for it to count as victory points and to count as being in command and control for the Germans. Really interesting puzzle suddenly from a German point of view. It's no longer a case of just hammering. You've really got to think about that. And that's something that I've just only really come to realise at this late point in the game, just how effective the Soviets can actually be when they use the terrain well. The next turn is turn 7. That's the final turn. So I'll have a look at what is going to be needed from both sides in terms of trying to secure victory at the start of that video. I think this is enough for now. I just need to do the admin, refit any disrupted units, perform any supply attrition and so on, and then I can crack on with turn 7, which will be the last turn. So the next video will be the last video. Thank you for staying with me this far, and I hope to see you for video number 7.